Hi everyone, my name is Dimitri from Ocean Protocol. We do jellyfish and decentralized intelligence. And today we have a very interesting panel because it's about decentralized governance. And every time I talk about the future of blockchain, it always ends up being governance being the pain point. Today I even went through this website, are we decentralized yet? And it seems we're not. There's like in every major project, there's like 3 major stakeholders that basically can rule out the others. So interesting things, but nevertheless, decentralized governance, I'm not the super expert. There's people here in this room that know way more about it, and we're gonna interrogate them a little bit. Let me first welcome to the stage Peter Czaban. Peter is an amazingly clever guy, and he's also executive director of the Web3 Foundation with Parity, and these guys do like a very, very big vision. So, yeah, Peter, maybe you want to say like 2 lines what you do and why you're on the governance panel.
Yeah, as Dimitri mentioned, I'm at the Web3 Foundation. So as the foundation, we really want to see widely used decentralized applications being developed. And the framework for developing those decentralized applications we call Web3. And one of the bigger projects that we support is the Polkadot project. And generally, in order to enable this framework to grow, we do research ourselves. We work with development partners, as you mentioned, Parity Technologies, but also others. And we try to help the community build decentralized applications. And Polkadot, in particular, one of the things that it enables is to have a network of blockchains that are currently disparate, but at the same time, the network can evolve and according to a governance process that we are researching and specifying.
The internet of value, something like that.
Yeah.
Very cool. I'm going to look forward to hear your insights into the governance aspect. Our next panel member would be Zoe Adamovicz. She's the director, she's the founder and CEO of Neufund, a Berlin-based company, and she can tell us all about, well, give it up for Zoe first.
Hi.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, I'm Zoe Adamovicz, not director, but co-founder and CEO of Neufund. We are a fundraising platform for blockchain, and we actually deal with security tokens, equity tokens, and other type of securities in future. And why am I on the governance panel? I guess that's because, while doing that, we actually enable organizations known commonly as companies, but also maybe other organizations in the future to fundraise, but also to invite them, the people that want to participate in these companies to basically participate, right? That means that we deal a lot with the governance issues such as reconciliation of shareholder and stakeholder, or the idea how companies that have a lot of shareholders, which are also very important stakeholders sometimes and sometimes not, how these companies should be governed, how much managerial oversight should there be, and maybe no managerial oversight whatsoever. So I guess that's the reason I'm here. And of course, we reconcile all of this with the law as well, which is an enterprise.
Connecting digital with the law, that's very interesting.
Exactly.
I think closely related would be André Eggert, our next panel member. He's a partner at LACORE, which is a Rechtsanwälte LLP. Thank you. Hi, André.
I'm sitting here, there.
Choose wherever. Maybe give us a quick intro and why governance matters to you.
Most of what you are saying is right, just that the firm is not called LACORE, but just LACORE. So, and we as a law firm, we have a special focus on blockchain and the regulatory framework, and governance on chain, which is a topic of this panel, we believe also somehow needs an interface to the off-chain world, needs to be connected with existing law, and we are trying to help with this, both with advising companies, but also in discussing this interface, for example, with governments like the government of Malta we are working with.
Cool. I hear you say 2 interesting things, on-chain and off-chain. Maybe a show of hands of people that don't really know what's that about. On-chain governance. Show of hands, we know what that means? All right. Who doesn't like to show his hand? Almost got you. So we're going to dive deeper on the on-chain governance, what it actually means. But first, let me introduce you to our last panel member, which is Ryan Ozonian from Mercury Protocol, flew in from LA all the way to be here. So, right, come here.
How's it going, everyone? This working?
Yeah.
Cool.
You're live.
Yeah, my name's Ryan Ozonian, or Ryan Ozo for short. I founded a company with Mark Cuban, in which our latest initiative is called the Mercury Protocol, which is a new communication network built on blockchain technology. We recently did a utility token sale in which we raised $10+ million to build the protocol out, and I think I'm on the governance panel because the products that we build out, whatever blockchain they're built on, the governance model plays a big part in the quality of the product.
So you're platform agnostic communication channel?
Yes.
Oh wow, that definitely built some
project.
bridges. Yeah. So maybe first things first. We mentioned on-chain governance. Peter, I think you might be you have your hands on this on-chain governance. Can you explain to the audience what it actually means?
Yeah. So there is maybe a few distinctions to be made, but first, what maybe we are more familiar with are centralized systems like Facebook, where there is, even though there is many people interacting using Facebook, there is still a single party in control of the evolution of the network and makes decisions what kind of changes should be made or which changes should not be made. And when we build now those new kinds of decentralized protocols where there is no single party that runs the protocol, we need to figure out how to still be able to evolve and make decisions without this central coordinating party. So we have to figure out what will be the decision-making process. Otherwise, we might end up stagnating and not making any decisions, which happens to some of those protocols. Like Bitcoin, for instance, had some issues recently trying to adapt new parameters. So that's the kind of the decentralized governance component. And now within the decentralized governance component, we can differentiate between governance that is specified by the protocol itself and kind of extra protocol processes that come together in order to make decisions about the protocol. So the on-chain governance component is the part of decision-making process that takes about kind of larger decisions about the protocol that takes place on-chain or inside the protocol, because we are mostly talking about blockchains, in this case, evolving. And there can be also other types of governance within blockchain, where, for instance, developers or companies developing software for those protocols make certain decisions, but which is still an interesting issue. But the one that we are most interested in how we can have more well-specified and transparent governance on-chain, so within the protocol, so that the kind of the network itself prescribes how people could be interacting together to come to consensus on the changes that should be made to the protocol.
So that would involve casting your votes digitally, and then when enough votes are tallied, the protocol would self-evolve and adapt that change?
Yeah, so if something similar to that. The thing is that basically on the same as with democracy, on the bottom layer we have kind of the stakeholders or the parties that are responsible for the governance process. In case of democracy, it's individuals. In case of decentralized protocols, it might be certain stakeholders of a particular protocol. But then still, just that doesn't let us make efficiently decisions and implement them. We need a structure that translates the wish of the people into execution, and also deals maybe with the fact that certain people are not really interested in decision making. So in democracy, we delegate to let's say to the parliament or to other governmental bodies the decision making. And the same kind of structures we might need to build up in a distributed setting.
I remember a quote from somebody called Peter Hinches from ZeroMQ, a very inspiring person. And he said, the product you make is a reflection of your organization. I think that's what governance entails, no? If you want to create a decentralized network, you have to have a layer of decision-making being decentralized as well.
Yeah, exactly. So there's different elements to this decentralization of the protocol, and if all the decision making is very centralized and it's very high threshold to kind of come in and actually help to make decisions, then that protocol is really controlled in one place. Yeah.
So maybe just to give us a little bit more like practical examples, maybe Zoe, can you tell us a little bit how you feel about, for example, the Bitcoin governance aspect? Like, how does it look like? Is it exemplary?
Maybe I'll tell about the Bitcoin governance, how I feel about it, but maybe I could just follow up on what you just said, because I think Facebook is a great example. And when I spoke about reconciliation of shareholder and stakeholder, then this is kind of what we see very well at Facebook. So the shareholders, so those that that want primarily the financial benefit of the existence of this company, are the shareholders, right? They want to maximize their value. So, for example, they might want more ads, right? The users, the stakeholders, they don't want more ads. They want a great product, but they have no say, right? And then the problem, and I think the one thing when you talk about on-chain governance and off-chain governance, there's clearly kind of two layers to it. One is that how we as a society want to design those incentive systems, and how do we design incentive systems that reconcile people that have opposite interests, for instance, right, and let them live in one society. So that's one question, and this question, to be honest, has been asked for centuries. So in a way, it's nothing new. But what is new in blockchain is that the idea of tokens and smart contracts have happened and emerged and gave us tools to bring in efficiently a lot more stakeholders to the decision-making process. Because, for example, if Facebook had 10 million or however many billion users, I don't know, if you wanted them to cast votes somehow, I mean, that would be a super tedious process. But if you have a smart contract and some ways to deal with them, and maybe even it becomes a network, that gives them a token to incentivize them to be active, then it's a completely different story. Then suddenly we can implement maybe the ideas of democracy, right? Suddenly we can change the society that way.
So are we then talking about more like a direct democracy or liquid democracy?
No, I mean, there's so many systems, and to be fair, as far as I know, there has not yet been in history a system that would be able to reconcile everyone. And I don't, democracy is great, but it's not the best, but there is nothing better, and there's different type of, democracies and whatever. I mean, and it's a different story, and I think it's important also to differentiate these two discussions, because it's not like blockchain comes here and brings a solution to the society. Blockchain gives us tools to better implement different types of solutions. And in company governance, this is pretty clear. That's what we deal with all the time. The Facebook question is the question, because if you fundraise with Neufund, then you suddenly might have 10 million shareholders that also are your token holders, they are also your stakeholders, and you need to give them a say, and that would be for the better, right?
Yeah. And maybe that's an interesting question for André. How far do you think we can go with tokenizing the enterprises? Like, how well does this digital governance reconcile the law and legal implications?
Well, I'd say that in principle you could very well tokenize any kind of entity or company that you see today. I mean, why would a shareholder or a stockholder or whatever it is just hold a share or a stock in the form of a certificate, which also is totally outdated? I mean, on the stock exchange, not certificates are traded, but some kind of digital form. So replacing that with a token is not such a difficult step. And some jurisdictions, like the jurisdiction of Delaware, for example, they already took that step. They already implemented law that would acknowledge tokens equal to shares. And then it would come with a lot of advantages, because then the token holding through through smart contracts and so on and so forth, you could cast votes and things like that. But if you only apply this, then indeed you wouldn't change so much to today's situation. I mean, you would just replace a kind of outdated instrument with a new instrument. I think what is much more attractive and more groundbreaking is that that the token and the decentralized governance and the networks allow us to think about completely new forms of entities, yeah, like the decentralized organization, like the DAOs. Yeah. And there we see on chain or on the blockchain, we see a development that the law hasn't caught up with. You need to, if you have a DAO, then what is this legally? There is so far no answer, except I think for one country, and that is Malta. They just implemented a law that that gives a DAO a legal personality.
We're definitely going to deep dive on that. But first of all, I want to ask something to Ryan. Sorry, I'm really terrible with names, but I think I got it now. So we're talking about tokens as shares and votes, but you're more talking about token as a utility, and it's somewhat that appeals me very much to the blockchain world, because these tokenized ecosystems, they allow basically utility providers, workers in the system, to also become stakeholders at the same time. We used to separate capital and equity from work, and now this kind of merges into each other with a token. And as I presume, you guys are working a lot on the token aspect of things, the utility.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you create a protocol that's application agnostic, you're basically merging, developers and users together to create their own kind of governed community, and them being able to share their own utility token and use it across multiple applications, thereby enhancing the kind of spirit of the community, I think is kind of a win-win for the users and developers, and you don't have to deal with any centralized entity or behemoth making, governance rules for you.
So it's basically disseminating governance across multiple networks.
Yep, and building a community around that.
Yeah, very interesting. And then we go from digital tribes to digital nations, however you want to call it. Now, maybe, I'm always fascinated by things like decentralized autonomous organizations. Maybe, again, a show of hands to see, like, anyone knows what we're talking about when we say the DAO? Well, let's then explain what we're talking about. And I think, who's taking this one? What's the DAO?
I can go. So a DAO is basically an organization, as the name implies. So it's an entity that doesn't function the logic of the entity. So how it kind of proceeds doesn't run on any centralized piece of infrastructure. And it's some organization, a collective of people that together work to perform certain actions. So it's a very generic thing. There is some particular examples. Some people consider something like a cryptocurrency in general a DAO. So it's basically an organization that pays out its maintainers. It is able to do certain adds a certain economic value to people. So it's able to process transactions for a fee. There are other examples of DAOs. There was a big DAO that was on the Ethereum network that was attempting to run a type of VC fund or on the blockchain, where people would collectively invest into something that runs on the blockchain, and then collectively make decisions about where investments should be made and under what conditions. And there is many other examples.
That sounds very promising. How did that turn out?
So unfortunately, because the operations are governed by a piece of code, if there is an issue with the piece of code that governs the operations of the organization, then the organization can fail. So in this case, there was a bug, and unfortunately, it didn't work out.
There was governance issue as well, right? Actually, this would be
exactly.
Actually,
as the DAO is operating, oftentimes decisions have to be made. If the system for making those decisions is not very well specified, then the DAO can stagnate. So in this case, there was not a lot of participation.
DAO took no decision.
Yeah, no one wanted to actually pick up and try to structure the decision making. But there is a lot of different projects and promises where people are trying to make smaller DAOs, maybe for a few freelancers working together and taking on contracts and then supplying services to people, and for that to be managed in a decentralized manner. So basically, it's kind of replacing what normally would be the bureaucracy of the organization and kind of the hierarchical structure of the organization with a clearly defined set of rules that the participants of this organization agree to.
Okay, so I remember the first line of the DAO, which was a comment that said, "Code is law." And I think now it's up to Zoe to give us your ideas about code is law and what's a DAO, how can it be legally enforced? We heard Malta was trying to do something there. Is it intuition or is it code or is it intent? What is law?
I think these are all really kind of concepts from a little bit different levels, right? So because saying code is law is like saying paper is law. Right? But it's not true, right? We have now law written on paper, but this law is not God-given. Someone has come up with it, and someone has written this down, and this is basically the rules that we as society agreed to play with, right? And if you say code is law, then one should ask the question, okay, but who is writing this? Who is creating this law that is then written into code, right? And currently, often the answer is developers, and I'm not sure this is the best answer, right? That's one thing, however, I think in the DAO example in particular, the sentence referred to the fact that to the execution part of the law, right? So not that, so that whatever rules you write in that code, as long as they are kind of executable on chain, they are, there's no way back, right? So if I don't know, if I owe someone money, the money will be paid. I cannot break this law easily, right? So that's what it meant.
So we have unstoppable code on a substrate that is
yeah, and the question is whether this is good, right? Because I guess one aspect of humanity is that is that there always will be gray zone, right? I mean, even mathematics itself is self-contradictory, and all of us who dealt with it know the Gödel's theorem and so on. So so we should not 100% rely on that. And I guess if you look even at the program of TOA, right? I mean, on one hand, everything is about blockchain. On the other hand, everything is about mindfulness. So I guess, what happens right now is that we're trying to kind of redefine how society should work, right? So, but we should not go too far in either direction.
So when I think about DAOs, you said there are stakeholders, there are actually people on that, but I can also imagine artificial intelligence entering this kind of governance structure. And then it becomes kind of weird, no? You mentioned that in Malta, they kind of approved decentralized autonomous organization to be a legal entity. Did they specify that then, are they saying that also machines and virtual entities can become, or maybe other type of things with self-actualization can actually become legal entities in some countries?
Yeah, that's what they're actually saying. Yeah, so the DAO is just one example that they applying it on and giving it making the legal entity. But in principle, it's any kind of piece of software. It's as generic as they describe it. So that can become a legal entity. I think this is all very much in early stage, and it needs further specification. But I think, but otherwise, I think it's pretty disrupting, because of course you could say that a DAO exists just online and everything is just happening there, and that would be maybe pure decentralization. But if you assume that there would be one small little step into the offline world, maybe this DAO needs an office for whatever reason, then it would be impossible for it to do it. The consensus mechanism would find someone in this organization, and then this person would have to rent it. But it would somehow rent it for on behalf of all the others. So it suddenly gets very crazy. But if that DAO would be acknowledged as a legal entity, then it could itself, as its decentralized organization, rent that office. And I think that's what they try to do. They try to build a bridge from online to offline. And I very much believe that this is needed. Otherwise, we will not be able to apply all these applications on our real life, which I think we need to admit to a large extent is happening offline.
Yeah, I'm assuming that. And maybe somebody that really lives the dream of decentralization and actually works towards it. Ryan, when you spin up your network, is there a point in time, well, I'm assuming you have to bootstrap it, you have to build your community around it, and then there should be a point where you guys dissolve into the community and this becomes a project for the community itself, managed by the community, or how
Yeah,
are you guys
absolutely.
doing?
I mean, from a business perspective, I mean, the idea is first to showcase a protocol like our own within our own products before we go out and say, okay, you know, all you developers come in and start implementing. Although we have had a lot of inbound already, I think it's important for us to showcase it first, showcase that it works and that it can operate well. Then, you know, bring in the, you know, probably the top 3 or 4 development projects that we see, have them integrate, kind of go slow with with blockchain technology as it is, right? And stick with that movement, and then eventually open it up, and then, like you said, kind of back off and let the, you know, users, developers, and community take over. So it's definitely a slow process.
Yeah, I mean, anti-fragile networks is what we're trying to build here. Things that you can explain in minutes and they mature in years, and there takes ages to replace. Maybe I see we're ending. We have a few more questions after, but I have a few more interesting questions that I love to ask. And I got fascinated by what something Stefan Tual from Slockit, he calls it DAOs, but actually it's self-owned resources. And it got me thinking that sometimes some things don't really belong to humanity. They may just, or single persons or single organizations, maybe they just belong to the world. And one of those DAOs is a self-owned resource called Terra Zero, which is a self-owned forest. Anyone here wants to explain what it is, what it does? No one? Right, then it's up to me. So basically how I got it was, so these guys are also based in Berlin, and it's basically a forest that manages its own resources. So people can cut some trees, but then they have to pay the forest rather than a human. So this is a form of a decentralized autonomous organization, but there's not really a human involved. It's a funds running on a blockchain, and it owns its own resources and has to make decisions as well. So if it doesn't have enough trees anymore, then it will hire people to basically plant new trees. And then we come to a state where we see that these virtual entities, they basically can take resources or interact with humans on terms of value and resources. So I'm very fascinated by these new kind of financial and agents in the system. So how do we guide those? Is it something to be scared of? Are we entering Skynet? Or are we have to do some hand-holding? Or what's happening here?
I think the idea that we humans own the planet and everything that's on this planet is pretty fucking crazy in itself, right? I mean, we should start from maybe questioning that. So I wish this forest all the best, to be honest, and maybe we can, you know, revert it and become slaves to the planet. So I like that.
I like that as well.
Like when we talk about those kind of things that already live out there, I think it's interesting to think also what are the, like, when those we think of those processes that enable for change to happen, or this forest sometimes maybe there are fires around and it needs to build a wall around itself. There is certain things that that we should prioritize. So important thing is, for instance, for the governance system that we have to represent well the interests of the people that are involved in the system. It is important for at the same time the decisions to be made efficiently and implemented quickly. And then I think that the third important thing is for the governance system to be able to help the community to come to consensus. So rather than favoring the community splitting over and over, so let's say part of the forest wants to do one thing and another thing, rather than splitting on every disagreement, there should be some process to try to maintain the cohesion. And then kind of analogy to that is with countries. Like we try to make coup very hard, and we try to make it very hard to split from a country. We rather prefer to maintain the network effect and the kind of the organizations that are kind of working together. So when we build those new protocols, it's on the other hand, it's extremely, because they are living in a digital domain, it's extremely easy for them to split and partition, losing a lot of the nice things about them. So. Yeah.
I think it's great because, you know, you mentioned people and people reconciliation, right? But yeah. I mean, we actually, when when we talk about the forest, and suddenly it's not about people only, it's about all the sentient beings and maybe non-sentient beings as well, right? So this is, and I think that, one interesting part of this whole discussion is, sometimes it gets pretty crazy and something between technology and so on, but, governance, it's not only about, who gets power, but it's also about how we humans want to limit our power, right? So, even in law, there are mechanisms that are self-defensive that don't let people gain too much power, right? Because this is self-destructive as well. And I think that, thanks to all this emergence of blockchain, we actually start to think about this too. And, the forest and the DAO are part of that. And I think that this is great, I don't think it's scary.
And, well, I think that's pretty important, actually, because, if you look back in history, when, there were times where there were radical democratism, and that wasn't good. It resulted in bloody revolutions. And the same was, when there was a time in, radical capitalism where a contract was a contract, whatever what was in there. And this also resulted in, a kind of civil wars, yeah. And sometimes I'm a bit worried that this, that this approach to consensus goes also that direction, that we simply say, well, the majority decides whatever cost that might impose on the minority, and we need to make sure that this is not happening, because this, that's going to result in very inefficient solutions at some point.
So we could say that unity is what we try to achieve by having consensus on the problems and the governance aspect of things, and interoperability might help.
How beautiful.
Maybe we have questions are streaming in, so I think we triggered something. So maybe we can just go to the questions of the audience, and then each one of you can kind of choose which one to pick. Oh, it's even ranked. A curated question list. Oh. Okay, this one is from somebody called Anonymous.
He's asking a lot of questions, actually.
Yeah, he's asking a lot. Given the prominence of people like Vitalik Buterin, who can sway the community's decisions, can we say that Ethereum governance is truly decentralized? I guess I'll have to ask this to somebody that's very much involved with the Ethereum community. Peter?
Yeah, so definitely, I was talking about the different qualities of governance, and definitely kind of having someone that strongly issues a direction makes it possible for the protocol to evolve, and it makes it it makes it easier to maintain coherence of the protocol. But it definitely doesn't favor very fair representation. Of course, it's relying on the trust towards that single party to represent everyone fairly. So it's definitely not truly decentralized in a way that it's not easy for one person to displace another in the decision-making process, and it is not clear how it functions, so it's pretty opaque. But at the same time, it's pretty pragmatic in the early days of those protocols, because it lets the protocol to evolve and maintain coherence.
But it is a strong figure, right? It is somewhat, people call it a benevolent dictator.
But there is a number of other projects and community members. I think it's...
Can you name a few?
So the people that implement the clients. So the Ethereum Foundation is not very monolithic. There is a number of different parties there that contribute to the decision making. Parity Technologies, which develops another major client, has also its own voice, and a number of other projects that build on top of the protocol as well can have big sway on what's the direction of the development, because those protocols ultimately drive the utility of the underlying network.
Okay. I'm gonna. I think the second question is quite interesting. Is early on-chain governance a good idea? Giving an early-stage organization barely knows itself, may need to mutate, and on-chain is harder to change. So this basically wants to say that, well, if we bake in the rules from the start, we might not be able to mutate them and to let them evolve and to have a lot of community input. So maybe anyone that feels fit?
Can do that.
All right.
One of the rules might be that we allow ourselves to change the rules, right? And that's what very often is part of the, any kind of these systems. So once it's okay under certain conditions, we also allow the law to change, right? Under certain conditions, we also can amend the smart contract, right? And that is all possible. So, and I think that it's wise to do that. And I think that, I mean, that's, you know, that's what I was earlier a little bit mentioning when we were discussing the code is law thing, right? We cannot rely on that because we also need to acknowledge that you know, that software, which is based on science, which is based on mathematics, contains this inefficiency, thanks God, because the inefficiency that is there is that, you know, modern mathematics, modern physics, and later all the development of these sciences, they all agree on one thing, that they cannot agree, right? That there's that you know, any axiomatic systems are that contain at least two axioms that are contradicting themselves. So basically, mathematics is not truth and never will be truth. But why this is good? I mean, a lot of scientists will say that, you know, this element that you know, that is there is what allows for change, right? Because this unknown element, that's the window that helps us change these systems and basically evolve, right? If we didn't have that, we would stagnate as nature, society, everything, right? And stagnation is death, right? So this element is there, and by the way, will always be there because this is the nature of things.
May I add something? I think that on-chain even gives us better opportunities to amend and implement changes. Yeah, because I mean, it is, you know, it's simply natural that they are early-stage organizations, and today they simply sign an agreement. Yeah, but try to amend an agreement. It often means that everybody needs to come again and sign, and maybe some people just don't do it. So it's very hard to enforce. But if you have an on-chain automated process in place that, you know, based on certain conditions allows implementing the chain, then this de facto assuming strategic behavior is not an objection anymore.
Yeah. Let's see for the next question. It's getting upvoted a little bit, and I'm going to give that one to Ryan.
How do you
You
think
got another
minorities
one.
should be dealt with?
Well, I'm going to give you the Google and Facebook question. How will decentralized organizations gain traction among the general population and compete against strong powers like Google, Facebook, maybe governments?
Yeah, well, I think it has to do with time and education. I think that people over time will realize that, you know, a community-based model is going to, you know, keep their privacy in check better, give them better decision-making processes and what they're doing, bring people together in a way we've never seen before. And I think that if we keep having episodes like
Cambridge Analytica?
Yeah, exactly.
Or many others?
Yeah, and I think if we keep having those episodes, we're just going to start learning that this is a better model, and over the course of time, I think it'll win.
Okay, we could argue that people are not typically conscious decision makers and go for convenience, but yeah. Now, a very important one. How do you think minorities should be dealt with in decentralized governance? Are we talking like subcultures, subtribes, real minorities, suppressed minorities? I think that's kind of what the decentralization paradigm kind of promotes, like reach, inclusion, get the unbanked, all of that. Who can give us some wisdom here?
So, yeah, it's a very hard question. I think decentralized governance can make the whole process very transparent, which doesn't introduce a lot of implicit discrimination that we can experience with current governance systems that don't kind of clearly state what is the exact process to make changes and enable everyone to participate equally. And at the same time, kind of because the rules apply across the board, they are usually much more thought through to kind of be not be overly restrictive on any particular party participating in the protocol. So and there can be still cells or kind of sub-communities that can establish their more kind of structured sets of rules. So, so there is definitely kind of the opportunity to have more transparency on the bottom layer and kind of just basic rules of interactions, the kind of simple algorithmic rules of interactions, and then on top of that have kind of places for everyone to be able to participate on top and create their own communities. So just to maybe give example, like with for instance Polkadot, like there is this network of different chains that interact with each other and share security. And the Polkadot network simply provides the consensus and the validity for those different blockchains to transition. But this is a very kind of mechanistic thing that is being fulfilled by this bottom layer. While you can have separate parachains that have much more elaborate sets of rules, and basically every single participant can feel free to gravitate to a certain set of parachains that they feel the most kind of reflects their needs or their values.
Yeah, I want to mention there a few projects that definitely are worth exploring. Aragon is all about community governance, which would resonate perfectly with Polkadot, I think. Each parachain has maybe a few Aragon communities. There's also Native Token, trying to create like not only local community and rules, but also giving them funds and manage tasks. So how far are we at this point in time with including minorities? Because as Zoe previously mentioned, it's all about, it's hackers, programmers, it's nerdy people, probably so Caucasian males between my age and, so how far are we?
We're not very far.
Do you think there's enough women in blockchain already?
Thank you for that question. As you know, I love it, but we're not very far. I think we need to do a lot better job, and I think what André said before is very smart. You know, like it can't be, democracy cannot win at the expense of minorities, because if we start to just do whatever majority wants, then we impose a certain will, right? And it might happen at very massive bloody cost. So I don't think we're very far with that.
And can you give us some pointers to like how can blockchain governance become more inclusive?
I really don't know, but I think, you know, we can learn a lot actually from the history, you know, because even systems like democracy, they have so many different, there's so many different types. And, you know, a lot of, I mean, I don't know, compare American democracy to German democracy, right? 2 parties versus however many parties we have in Germany, I'm not even sure, but it's so many, you know, and they all have a voice, and in America it's just left or right. So, you know, even there, one can look a little bit at where we can do better.
So we ran out of time. There's still a few open questions, but I think you can meet the speakers after the stage. So yeah, that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I did enjoy it, so give it up.
Thanks, Steven.
Thank you.